Great. And I'll let everybody in now as well. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see some of your faces coming into the room this morning. Well, this morning where we are. I know that we have a very large group of people from across the world today, which is great. Thanks for your patience in the waiting room. I'm just admitting the last few people who are still in there. So bear with us and we will get started shortly. Lovely. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I am on here in Brisbane, Australia, the Yagara and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before we begin today's event, which I am very pleased to be here with you all for, I would just like to very quickly reiterate some of the information that you were sent in the email with your link to join us today. So you have all automatically been placed on mute and you'll remain so throughout the event. But that doesn't mean that Michael isn't keen to answer some of your questions. He is. It's just going to take the form a little bit different than you might be used to. So at Avid Reader, we take all of our questions using the chat box. They will come straight through to me and I will then read them out when I'm prompted to do so later on today. So if you can't see the chat box, it should be towards the lower left of your screen. Again, if you can't find it, don't worry. I'm going to be posting the links so that you can purchase your copies of the Law of Innocence if you haven't already in that chat box shortly, and it will pop up when I do so. So type your questions there through to me as and when you think of them, and I will read them out towards the end of today's event. And so it is now my pleasure to introduce Michael Connelly. Michael's books have sold more than 74 million copies worldwide. They've been translated into 40 languages and have won awards all over the world, including the Edgar and Anthony Awards. Michael has also been awarded the 2018 CWA Diamond Dagger, the highest honour in British crime writing. He is the executive producer of the successful TV series Bosch and the creator and host of the podcast Murder Book. He spends his time in California and Florida. In conversation with Michael today, we have Ben Hobson. Ben is the author of the novella If the Saddle Breaks My Spine and of the novels To Become a Whale and Snake Island. And so, Michael and Ben, it is now my pleasure to hand over to you both for today's discussion of the Law of Innocence.
Well, thank you very much, Emma, and thank you everybody for being here today. It's awesome that so many of Michael's fans in Australia have joined us today. Now, we actually Michael and I met this time last year, and it was a very different circumstances, obviously, because Michael actually got to be here and it was, it was a really good vibe and we had a great discussion. But I guess, my question, Michael, just to start with is, how are you with the pandemic and the election? I mean, and there's a lot of things going on. Just a general question. How are things over there for you?
Well, I think they're about as crazy as you would expect them to be. It's been a strange year between pandemic, things with George Floyd, whose name I'm sure is known over there in Australia, and other police shootings leading to some unrest and some reevaluation of how we police our communities. And then on top of that is, you have this election that you think is over, but one guy won't leave, one guy wants in. It's kind of a crazy time. And so I'm kind of hoping that, hey, maybe people want to get away from all this and read a book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's such a refuge book. And if you haven't already picked up your copy, Emma's going to put the link into the chat. You're one of the most reliable novelists, Michael, I feel. Like, there are some other novelists and some thrillers, and maybe you read a couple and you're like, I didn't like that one as much, but you just always seem to hit it out of the park. Congratulations on the novel. I enjoyed it thoroughly. The first book of yours I actually read in one day. I couldn't put it down. Yet I started it, and the parenting of the children and cooking meals and all that stuff just went out the window because I had to see what happened. So such a gripping read. Congratulations on it. I also heard recently that you got to 80 million copies sold across the world, which is huge. And I'm just wondering, this question came actually from my boss at work, named Sue, and she asked it because she's a huge fan, but how do you keep your books so interesting? Bosch and Haller and all of your characters have been on so many adventures and done so many things, but how do you just keep them so engaging and so rich?
I mean, that's actually a hard question to answer. I was a newspaper reporter before this, so I kind of have a reporter's curiosity. And so I surround myself with the kind of people that I want to write about, like, defense lawyers for Mickey Haller and detectives for Harry Bosch and Renee Ballard, for example. And, I'm always like kind of casting a net. I'm always talking to these people about their lives and how they do these and what interesting cases they have. And, and I'm just lucky, I think, that I also write about this place, Los Angeles, which has, an kind of like infinite curiosity about this place that I have. And I think that spreads around the world. It's a place that people are interested in. And that kind of gives me extra points before I even write a page of a book. And, and I just try to, and I, at the same time, I have a high bar that I hold myself to, that I want to, I don't want to like just ride on my coattails or anything like that. I want to push things out. Like, for example, I haven't written a book that Mickey Haller carried. This book is the first one in 7 years. And it wasn't because I didn't like the guy or anything. It was more like, I don't want to do another Mickey Haller book that, just puts me in a situation where he's either defending someone who did it or didn't do it. It has a kind of a same old feel to it. And so I kind of waited till I got the idea for this book, and it's not giving anything away because it's in the first chapter, but, in this book, he's defending himself, and the stakes are very high. It's a life-changing case. He either goes away to prison for the rest of his life or he finds his way out of this jam. And so when I kind of came across that as an idea, I knew, okay, I think I can expand the Mickey Haller universe with this, and what I've said about him in the past, I can explore something new. And so that's what I'm always looking for. I know I've written a lot of books about like Harry Bosch and so forth, but you got to trust me. If I reach a point where I think that I'm just cruising with Harry Bosch, then I won't write about him anymore. I just don't want to do that.
Yeah, and I get that sense too, because like I was saying, every one of your books that I read is engaging in that way. Like, you take all these risks with the characters, whereas if you're playing it safe, nothing shocking would happen to them and they wouldn't change over time. But your characters always seem to start in one spot and end in a different spot. With Mickey, and like you said, like, we were introduced to him in 2005 in The Lincoln Lawyer. And then the last time we saw him was The Gods of Guilt. How would you say he's changed? Like, and maybe in how you pictured him as well in the course of the last 15 years, like, how has he changed and grown for you as a character?
Well, when he started out, he was kind of a schleppy kind of guy. Now I think he looks like Matthew McConaughey. I'm just kidding. But, I think that, like all characters change as they age. I mean, he's been through some rough times. He got shot in a book, led to an addiction. So he's a guy who kind of is on that edge of addiction, which I think has changed him from, from when we first met him. I think, everyone gets their edges sanded off a little bit by time, by age. And I count him above that. And I think he has more of a kind of accepting view of the world. probably his accepting, but also, I mean, there's a lot of things that contradict. I would say I'd also throw cynicism in there, and that actually helps him in his job. I think when he kind of is not expecting good things from people, he kind of sees the steps that are 3 steps ahead of him, what's going to happen, and in this book, he doesn't like his cynicism leads him to believe the prosecutor who's going up against him is not a truth seeker, but more someone who wants to win. And there's a difference there. And that allows him to figure out what move she's going to make. And he tries to stay in front of her that way. And I think that comes with experience and age. And I think you can see that in the span of the books I've written about him.
Yeah. He seems to have matured a lot. He seems to, like you say, have all this experience of people under his belt. Like he's more mature in his thinking, and I feel like he's a bit more strategic too. So he sort of just swept and looks at the pieces, but he was a bit more quick before, is how I felt about him, at least.
Yeah, I think in this book in particular, because again, we're not giving this away. It's in the first chapter. He gets charged with a murder, and he finds himself in a courtroom where a judge has vindictively gives him a high bail, so he can't get out of jail. And so that you're talking about his strategy. He's all strategy now because he has to kind of conduct his defense from a jail cell, and that was the challenge I threw to me, and it's a challenge to him as well. I had to make this a story that moves, had momentum, had hooks in it. But the protagonist for a lot of this book, probably half of it all added up, is in a jail cell, but yet I got to keep the story moving, and yet he has to get prepared for a defense because his life is on the line. So we both had these challenges that came out of the same circumstances, and I think that that helped me a lot in the writing of the book.
Yeah, and it is absolutely gripping too. Like when you're reading him in the jail cell, having to plot and strategize about his defense, and I was feeling the panic, creeping in as his, this thing's coming up, this thing where his life could be, like you said, completely demolished and completely changed.
Right.
And yet he still has to keep like a clear head, and he manages it, which I think is a mark of his maturity. I actually read, and just on the topic of this, because I think it's so interesting, I read a review of The Law of Innocence, and it said this: "It's amazing really how well Connelly seems to grasp the ins and outs of the legal system when writing Mickey Haller, or the inner workings of the LAPD when he's writing Bosch. Few authors have the ability to write with such authority on matters of which they haven't actually accumulated any firsthand experience, and yet he makes it look almost effortless." And so the circumstances where he is a lawyer representing himself in jail are so unique and so interesting. And I was wondering how you started to research what that process would be like, because I feel like there wouldn't be that many people who would have that sort of firsthand experience of doing that.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to be the first to say there's imagination in there, because I did not go to jail, and I can't admit that I've been arrested or anything like that. I visited people in jail way back when I was a reporter, so I had a sense of the noise and all that, the steel, and I had that also in Los Angeles County, the sheriff's department. Every sheriff's deputy that's brought on has to spend their first assignment, and usually it's 2 to 3 years working in the jail. So any deputy has that experience, and so I was able to talk to a couple people about that, like working in jails and what it was like. And then it's the power of the internet. Twin Towers is the name of the jail where he spends his time, and there's all kinds of photos online and information about that place, which is kind of interesting, because you think, jail, you don't want people to escape. You don't want to help people have plans on how to escape and see possible weaknesses, but there's lots of photos and things like that. So I did a lot of that kind of research, but basically when you're in a room that's 6 by 8, it doesn't matter whether it's a steel walled room or your own writing room. you can imagine isolation and things like that, and then you can extrapolate it further. Like when I'm in my writing room by myself, I can just leave anytime I want, but then he cannot. And he knows that when the door does come open, there could be dangers out there and so forth. So, I think, a writer's supposed to imagine, and I think I have a lot of that. When it comes to like working homicide cases and actually being in a courtroom and defending a murder case or something, I just have people that help me with that, and I give them my first drafts and say, what do I got wrong? What can I do better? And these people I rely on are very helpful to me.
Yeah, and it felt completely authentic, and all of your novels feel like the world that you flesh out feels completely authentic and well known. And how Mickey, how he has to like organize his defense, and so he has people meet him in a room, but they only have the hour to go over material, or he's allowed a private phone call on the system, but he's not allowed to, like, there's all these legal procedures that I just found so authentic and so finely, they're so finely drawn. They're not, you didn't try to fudge your way through, you know what I mean? Like you feel like you completely know exactly how things work and how Mickey would do things in certain situations.
Yeah, I guess, or else it's the trick of writing. I don't know, but I mean, like one thing, like now that we're talking about this, I really was fascinated about how some of the people I talked to for research said the place where you're most vulnerable when you're an individual who's incarcerated is when they put you on a bus and take you to the courthouse, because that is kind of random selection in terms of who you're going to be chained to and all that, and that's when a lot of bad things can happen. And so I asked lots of questions about that, and I won't get into it here, but there's at least a few sequences where Mickey's on the bus going to or from court, and hopefully they're very edgy sequences.
Yeah, they are, absolutely are. Just to go back a little bit, because we were talking earlier about you had the idea for this novel. Was that how it came to you? Was it through, like you said, casting a large net and talking to people? Or did it just come to you, hey, Mickey could have this case where he is the one who's charged? How did you get the idea and inspiration to the plot of this novel?
I think that was just something came to my head, like, what haven't I done? How do I get, it's kind of like what I said before. I'm not up for spending a year writing about Mickey defending another murder case or something. I needed something more to want to do it. And I hadn't found it for a while, because for a while there I was writing a holler book maybe every 2 or 3 years, and then it dropped off because I felt there was a kind of a repetitive nature to the books. And so what I was struggling with was how do I break out of that? And it just kind of came to me like this is something I could do. And then I started, I gather stuff all along. I'm always interested in stuff. There at the core of this case is a big scam, a con on the government that cost the government millions of dollars. That's a real con that played out in the newspapers here. It was a really big scam and a big case. And, I clipped those things and I thought that is an interesting scam that, maybe I can work into a book sometime. And so I start with the idea that Mickey's charged with a murder of he's a former client found murdered in the trunk of Mickey's car, and he is a con man. And so I just kind of knew we go into this book, there's not a challenge to the reader of like, wow, did he do it or did he not do it? Mickey Haller didn't do it. So I'm not trying to throw that up as the drama. The drama is, can he get out of what looks like a really good frame job?
Yeah.
And that's where hopefully the drama and intensity is. And so I knew that if by putting a dead con man in his trunk, that this is going to lead to some kind of con. And so I pulled those clips out of my back pocket. It was a case that happened about 6 or 8 years ago.
Wow.
And so I so you kind of take stuff that you've been gathering for a while, and then you add this new idea to it, Mickey in jail.
And when you wrote that scene, I'm just curious about how you write this stuff. Like when you write that scene where he's driving along and the police pull him over, and then I think he notices the blood dripping out the back, and so he gets him to pop the boot of the car, and then there's this dead body inside, which is such a good opening. But did you know like where it was going to go exactly, or did you sort of just put Mickey in this situation and then with the reader sort of figure out how he would get himself out of this jam?
I didn't know a whole lot. I mean, I knew, when I chose who the victim was in his trunk, I kind of knew that would give me a direction. And I knew, but there's a lot of stuff I didn't know. I think that one of the biggest things I didn't know, and this is not really a giveaway, but Mickey's in jail. He needs people to help him. So he's got Cisco, Harry Bosch volunteers to help. I think that's quite expected. What's not expected, and that I wrote probably half of this book before I said, wait a minute, why don't I do this? And that is that his ex-wife, Maggie, who's a prosecutor, essentially takes a leave to work on his case, to help him. Because I think, like the readers, no reader, when he gets arrested on page 3 or whatever it is going to think he did it. Maggie, they're divorced, but Maggie knows this guy, the father of their daughter, and she knows he couldn't have done this, so she's going to help him. And that would have been something you'd think I knew from the beginning, and I didn't. It's an obvious thing, but I just didn't come up with it till I was well into the book.
Mm. I actually do like how you do that sort of stuff, though. Like all of your characters always act very authentically to their character. And it's not like, when you watch those Marvel movies where Captain America's running around and you're like, why doesn't he just call Thor? You don't do that. You just have your characters, okay, well, I need an investigator. I'll call my half-brother, Harry. I really like that stuff. And so, yeah, when Maggie comes on the scene, I think it's really, it does feel like Mickey's sort of realizing he can do this at the same time that the reader is as well.
Yeah.
And you're talking then just about the daughter. I feel like that's one of the biggest things about Mickey's character, is that he's developed in his relationship with his daughter across all the novels. What can you tell us about their relationship and how it affects him in this particular novel?
I think his daughter is in law school in this book, and so she has a mother who's a prosecutor and a father who's a criminal defense attorney. And so I like view her as someone who's got to make a choice of which path she's going to take. And, and so I think she's leaning towards her mother's path, and when all this goes down, but she gets a chance to see her father, out of loyalty. She's in court a lot and gets to see the David and Goliath of it, which is, to me, very attractive in terms of writing these books and reading these kind of books. But it's also really attractive to the people who do it. I know a lot of defense attorneys, and they have to go up against, the power and might of the state. And it's definitely a David and Goliath thing. And, so I wanted his daughter to see that. And because I'm thinking a little bit ahead, like, the next generation, if I'm still around and writing, who will I just create new characters, or will some of these people, like Harry's daughter and Mickey's daughter, grow to the point where I write about them? The difference between Mickey and Harry and their daughters is that even though both are divorced families, Harry had a bigger hand in raising his daughter than Mickey did, and like Mickey's addiction history, which is covered in other books, has left him, I think, with a huge level of guilt over what he missed with his daughter, or some of the risk he put his daughter into. And I think that's kind of built a space between them that, if I get a chance to write about him again, if I come up with another idea that's a little bit outside the box, then I'll explore that further.
And yeah, it is really cool when she's watching him do his thing. It's so, you can feel her admiration for what he's doing. But you also set up the antagonist, who is working for the state and who's trying to prosecute the trial, as such a compelling, I wouldn't say bad guy. Like, she's acting always in again, consistency with her character, and she really truly believes that Mickey did it. How did you go about drawing that antagonist and creating that character? Because it would have been easy to just have a random person in there who represents stuff, but you drew a real character.
Well, I tried to. I mean, I think that prosecutors in the LA County District Attorney's Office are some of the best lawyers. I mean, you're just not going to get a job there unless you have some skills. And I think, there's a line, but it's a very thin line between, wanting to find the truth in a trial and wanting to win a trial. They're different things, but they're very close. And I think, just how cops can kind of get prematurely cynical about everything.
Yeah.
By what they see, I think prosecutors can move towards that line of just wanting to win. And the other thing is, I knew that even though this is a legal drama, and maybe it's even called a courtroom drama, I don't want to spend a lot of time in trial. I like all the run up to trial. I like all the skirmishing with the between lawyers. I find that fascinating. When I was a reporter and I covered courts, I loved that more than the trial itself, because the realistic thing is, once you get to a trial, everything is known. There's really rarely a surprise, but surprises do come out in pre-trial hearings and motion hearings and things like that. And so I just wanted Mickey to go up against someone that is at least his equal when we have these kind of arguments. I don't want him mowing anyone down with his intellect or his skills. I want him to be matched in intellect and skills.
Yeah, all those moments, you paint them so well. So one of my favorite things about reading like a legal thriller is, like you say, in that lead up, we're always on the position of the underdog, and I think that's what Mickey Hollard is a lot of the time. In, like you said, in all his novels, is he plays this underdog, but then it's like sports where everything's set up against this team, and then they manage to score a goal. There's this brilliant scene, I won't give much away, but there's this brilliant part which made me I was pumped up when I read it, where he does a thing with the phone in jail. I'm not going to go into it, but it's in the trial. There's this moment, and I just thought, yes, and he gets one up, and I was so happy for him. But I was wondering how you go about crafting those scenes so well. Like, it is like, do you have all the little steps up and then the climax of those little moments in the courtroom, where I just felt like so pumped up for him?
Oh, that's cool. Well, I mean, you think about that, or you hope for that. You plan these things. I'm not the genius who makes it all up. A lot of the stuff is handed to me. Like in real life, the sheriff's department runs the jails in LA County, and in the last, it's all been kind of calm for the last 3 years, but in the last 5 years, it's been tremendous scandal and corruption in the operation of the jails. And in fact, the head guy, the sheriff of LA County, is in prison right now for corruption related to the jails. And part of the corruption was, inside the jails, they maintain an intelligence unit because, there's all these gang members, organized crime there, and there's snitches and all that kind of stuff. So they're constantly drawing information out of the jails, and part of the corruption that occurred in the investigation and so forth revealed that they were listening in on phone calls that they shouldn't have listened into. And so, that was just something I knew, and I knew I could possibly use that in a way, and you didn't want to give it away, and I kind of gave it away. But, at some point in this thing, Mickey's trying to defend himself from jail, and he has to talk to investigators. And he's Mickey. He knows how the system is. He assumes that people are listening to him that shouldn't be. So he kind of sets them up.
Yeah, I guess that's that cynicism that helps him out, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to talk quickly about the title, which is, it's such a good title. There's a quote in the book, and let me just read it here. It says, "The law of innocence is unwritten, and it's not found in any leather-bound code book. It will never be argued in a courtroom. In nature, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. In the law of innocence, for every man not guilty of a crime, there is a man out there who is. And to prove true innocence, the guilty man must be found and exposed to the world." Just such an interesting idea. And I just wanted to talk and pick your brain a little bit about what that quote means to you, what the title of this novel means.
Well, I mean, it's somewhat explained there, but what I was thinking was that, Mickey is somewhat of a public figure. In the books, I kind of break the fourth wall, and I even talk about how in some of the books that there was a movie about him where Matthew McConaughey played him. So, and he has but his face on bus benches, on the back of buses. He's advertising, billboards, all that kind of stuff. So he's somewhat of a public figure, and so I think he was smart enough to realize that our court system only provides guilty, not guilty, and obviously the priority is I have to win that case, so I'm a free man. But if I can, I have to win the case in the court of public opinion. I need to get out there that people know that I was set up, that not only am I not guilty, but I am innocent. And so that's a second level you can go for. And I spend time with real defense attorneys, and they always have this conversation with prospective clients. When the client says, "I didn't do this, I'm innocent," and you got to prove that, and they always say, "I can't prove you're innocent. I can only get you a not guilty." That's what courts do in this country, and and sometimes that's just not good enough, and that's what Mickey's thinking was here, that he has to get go beyond what they say in court to at least proving to the world, whether it's through a declaration by someone in authority or some other way, he's got to prove that he's innocent.
Yeah, and I guess, like you say, because he's this public figure, his whole world would just crumble, right? And everyone would be talking about this guy who's still in the court of public opinion. You have to be proclaimed innocent, not just not guilty. That's such an interesting idea. I've got a few more quick questions. It looks like we're getting a few questions in the chat, but just a reminder to anyone who's joined us, if you have any questions for Michael, we'll be going to a few questions at the end of today's session, and I'm sure he's very happy to answer them. Something else I felt that you did extremely well in here, and I am really interested in how you did this, was you factored in the world that we live in now, in the pandemic and COVID. And you sort of charted the course of the novel takes place over Christmas and then January, February, and into March as well, and just how the whole world had this huge calamitous trauma that happened to the world. The reason I'm curious about this is because when we spoke last year in November, you were talking about writing this, but it feels like it's such a part of the novel. I mean, it's not so much, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not integral to the novel, but it sort of is, like it's always there and it's so well factored in. And I'm really curious, how did you go about doing that in such a clever and interesting way? It's probably the first book I've read that had this world that we live in now currently in the pages. How did you do it, Michael?
It was unplanned, I'll tell you that. I always set my books in the year that they are first published. I want to be really contemporary, and that gives me the opportunity to comment or mirror things going on in society. And I've done that since the very first book. And so I was doing that with this book, and I started writing this book probably when I was on my trip to Australia. That's usually when I start, in late November and December. And I set it in April of 2020, and I'm writing it. I'm not at April yet, but that's what I often do. And then if something happens in the month I set my book, I can incorporate it. Mm-hmm. But something really big happened here, and we had this pandemic start, And in March, they shut down the courthouses in Los Angeles County, in all of California, actually. So I was suddenly writing a book that was not realistic. And that's a killer for me. I want my books to at least appear realistic, if not be very realistic. And so I stopped writing. I didn't write for about 3 weeks. The world was seemed to be going sideways, and so it wasn't just that I didn't know what to write. It was like more like I had to sit back and see what's going on in the world. And then I just decided to move it back. Instead of set it in April, I set it basically to end in February, and that gave me the opportunity to kind of seed in. I think very lightly. It's not a big thing about pandemic, but just like the different warnings or some of the news things. I think it was January 24th they started the Centers for Disease Control in my country were greeting planes that came in from Wuhan. That those kind of things started making stories.
Yeah.
And at the same time, as things would later come out, a lot of information was kept from us by the administration, and that was an issue. But what I was trying to use was Mickey was headed towards a trial where it was a long shot that he'll be able to rescue his life. So there was a sense of kind of doom out there, and then and if you add the pandemic, it just doubles down on that. And I didn't have to say doom was coming, but I knew everybody who read the book would know what happened.
Yeah.
So that was kind of part of that. The other thing that it wouldn't mean as much in Australia, but in Los Angeles, I was also able to put in the death of Kobe Bryant, who's like an iconic Los Angeles sports hero. I mean, his death was just a gigantic thing. And, and I was equally thinking about that, and how, when Mickey's on the bus being moved around to courthouses and stuff, he would, almost overnight, there's all these murals painted on buildings, big and small, about Kobe Bryant, and it kind of changed the landscape of Los Angeles. And I thought it was important that, the book would reflect that as well.
Yeah. And like you say, it's so cleverly done where it's not the focus of the thing, but the impending trial date. And then, I think you had a scene where Bosch is listening to a radio and he just hears something about Wuhan and he hears about the virus. And then it suddenly clicked for me, oh no, we're in the real world. Oh no, this is happening. And so I felt the dread of this thing coming up where I was like, is Mickey going to be able to squeeze this out in time? But the characters didn't know it. And it felt, it was very elegantly done, I think. Very clever.
Thanks.
No worries. Another question I had for you. When we're reading these books, we're obviously very emotionally engaged with these characters. And so when we see Mickey's going to, Harry offers to do some investigative work for Mickey, we get that thrill of like, oh, we're going to see Harry, and we go on the journey with Mickey and we feel the weight of his circumstance, and, that he might lose his relationship with his daughter and all these things. I was wondering, when you're writing, do you feel like this emotional kind of pull for these characters during the actual creation of the words? Or are you a little bit more removed from the emotional ties that we get as readers?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle of that. I'm definitely removed because I don't outline my books, but I have a good sense of what's going to happen. And not only the big picture of what's going to happen in trial and so forth, but the smaller stuff of what will happen between, relationships, characters, and things like that. And So I'm also aware that I want to keep, the reader guessing about that, worried about that, that is always good. I remember I went to a book signing once, and when I asked for questions, someone said, "I'm very worried about Harry Bosch." It was just a generic, And that's a wonderful compliment, that something in your books has made someone worried, that goes beyond the bounds of the story that you're telling them, that they're just overall worried about this character. And it was a good lesson to learn that that people do, it's the power of storytelling. People take these characters to heart. And so you really gotta put a lot of thought into it, and think about how different moves, different relationships and so forth will impact people.
Absolutely. There's a couple more quick questions, just sort of about what's next before we go to some audience questions. Bosch is currently shooting season 7, hit TV show, longest running TV show on Amazon Prime. So it's been an amazing success. What can you tell us about this current season that's currently shooting? Is there anything that you can give us?
It's what do you call it? The book, The Burning Room is the book we're adapting. And in prior seasons, we've sometimes adapted as many as 3 books or taken from 3 books. This one's pretty much, well, we have some leftover storytelling from season 6, but as far as the books go, it's really just the Burning Room, which was a book that was inspired by a real crime, a really awful crime, where there was a arson in an apartment building, and several people, including kids, died. And so and that was a true case that was unsolved at the time I wrote. Actually, it was unsolved at the time I wrote The Burning Room, and it was a cold case because it happened in the 90s. And then, like a year after that book came out, they actually solved it and arrested the arsonist.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool, but we're doing that, and it's a very emotional case because kids, we're not going to. I guess it's TV, so you don't want to have as many victims as happened in real life or that were in the book.
Yeah.
But there's one little girl who dies of smoke inhalation, and Bosch is really connected to her path in life because she's an immigrant and so forth. And so it's a very emotional case for Harry, and it follows along the lines of the book. And I don't want to give the book away, so I don't want to give
No, that's
what we're going to do
understandable
during the season. But it's I think we're halfway through the filming of it, and it's I've seen three cut episodes so far, and it's looking really good. And and we're hoping that we change Amazon's mind. That I thank them for telling us ahead of time that this is your last season, so we could write to an ending. But the world's changed since they made that decision, and the pandemic shut down most of Hollywood for 6 months. And Amazon's going to need inventory, product, whatever you want to call it. They're going to need shows, and so we're hoping to change their mind. So we'll see.
Yeah, I hope so too. And I'm excited for that season. That's the first novel of yours I read was The Burning Room. So that makes me super excited to see the next season. And I guess just one last question before we go to some audience questions. Where are we next with the next novel? What are you working on? Will we see Renee again?
Yeah, I haven't started writing it. I'm about to start. We have a holiday over here called Thanksgiving, and I usually start writing during that break. So I'm right on the verge of doing this. And it's going to be a Renee Ballard and Bosch story. And it's going to be really interesting. I'm really excited about writing about it because it's going to be, again, I'm setting it in next year. So all the social implications and unrest, protests, the changing of how we are looking at how we police our communities, all that, I have to get into it. We still have the pandemic, but crime goes on. And Renee Ballard is inspired by a real detective, and she's out there working cases with her mask on. And, and that I want to write about that. I want capture the world as it's changed in this, last 9 months or a year. I got to get that in. So I'm looking
Yeah,
forward to it.
I'm looking forward to reading it. It sounds really, really interesting. Emma, are we able to go to some audience questions, please? I can even see we've got a few.
Yes, we definitely do. We've had lots come through, so I'll try and get through as many as I can. Let's get straight in, shall we? So on the topic of those TV adaptations, Michael, quite a lot of people have been asking what it's like to be so involved in the adaptations of your work, and whether you'll continue to be this involved in future.
Sure. I just switched to the gallery view and I see Wayne and Jody and a few people wearing the Everybody Counts shirt. That's very cool. Yeah, being involved in a TV show, especially when it came in my, where I was in my life and so forth, it's just been a fun experience. It's just, and very fulfilling, because I think we're making a very good show, and it's a show I'm proud of. So, if it was like Harry Bosch Light or something, I probably wouldn't be so proud, and I probably wouldn't stay involved. But it's turned out really well. So it's been a great experience. After I've had, like every writer, I've had some bad experiences in Hollywood as well. So this has been fun, and it all draws out of people loving LA. We make the show in LA, the crew's from LA, and they all feel that we're telling kind of dark stories, but at the same time we're celebrating the place, and there's an esprit de corps among the cast and crew, and it's really infectious. And so I love being there as much as I can. The key thing is, though, to remember that, hey, first and foremost, I'm a book writer, and I always have to make time to be able to continue to write my books, because that's the biggest draw for me of all. The thing that gets me going the most is being by myself and writing my books. But if I have a great morning of writing, I'll wander down to the set and watch some some stuff, or I'll go to the writing room and hear what we're cooking up. And it's very fortunate that I get to do that, and I love doing it. So it is bittersweet that this could possibly be the last season. But like I said, we're lobbying, we're working on it. I know there's a lot of fans out there doing the same, and it all helps.
Thank you. Yeah, we've had lots of people mentioning that as well. There certainly are. Speaking about the Everybody Counts t-shirts, a couple of people have mentioned that that they donated, and they're wondering if you can provide an update on how the campaign went.
It went very well. I mean, the t-shirts benefited a homeless shelter for kids, for youth. Teenagers, and doesn't appear to be any shortage of them in Los Angeles and Hollywood. So it's been very helpful. And like during the pandemic, we were able to get something like 5,000 masks to them, and money as well. And so it's been very good. And I think we'll maybe once a year we'll do it again, maybe try to style a different shirt or something. I don't know, but it's very fulfilling that so many people have taken part and done this. So it's great.
Thank you. Valerie has asked, I know we've touched on this a little bit, but perhaps you could talk a bit more about it. Whether or not the recent calls to defund the police will or have impacted the way that you will write about the LAPD in your books.
Yeah, like I said, the next book is definitely going to impact on that. I mean, it's interesting because I've been in LA a long time, and I was a reporter during the riots back in 1992, and there was all this hope and demand and acknowledgement of needed change. And then this past year really makes you assess that maybe we haven't changed anything. And that to me is like, heartbreaking, especially in the city of Los Angeles. So I want to get to the heart of that. I want, I want to write a story that's going to have that question and those issues brought up. I've always tried to, I don't want to be didactic and tell anyone how they should think or anything like that, but I want to reflect what's going on in society, and I've done that in the past, so I'll definitely uh, be taking that in the story. It's interesting. We wrote the season 7 of Bosch before any of this happened. So season 7 of Bosch is set in January of this year, so it's not going to touch on any of this stuff, although it's a case, if you read The Burning Room, it's a case that touches on these issues. So I'm happy with that. But I think if we get another shot at doing another season of Bosch, we will also include it in that as well.
Thanks. Stephen has asked a bit about how your background as a journalist, which you just mentioned, has helped with your fiction, and if at all, if it's made fiction more difficult to write.
No, I mean, I think I think we would not be talking, if I wouldn't even be on the screen if I had not been a journalist. It's really been the backbone of what I do as a fiction writer, as a novelist. It's informed everything, and it's also given me not only a work ethic but a kind of a research ethic, where I try to be very accurate in my books, even though they are fiction. So I think it's just part of my DNA at this point, and very much a part of how I go about my job now. I'm very much like a journalist when I spend time with cops and lawyers and so forth, and ask questions. And what's good is at the end of the day, I write fiction, so I can move things around. I can take nuggets of story that I've heard and put them where I want. And then hopefully, even though it is classified as fiction, there's an element of truth and journalism in what I do.
Thank you. Kate and a few other of our guests have been asking a bit about your writing process and whether you can tell us a bit about it, and how COVID-19 has changed how you go about writing and researching.
Yeah, I'm a morning person, and plus, like I said in an earlier answer, the TV show is out there, and so I like to be writing in the morning while it's still dark, before it gets light, and get as much momentum into writing and get as much done as I can by lunch. And if I'm happy with what I've done, then I feel free to go over and check out what's going on the TV show and so forth. COVID has not, COVID has been brutal around the world, and it's so painful to so many people who have lost loved ones or have gotten sick themselves. I hate talking about it because I've been so lucky, nothing has happened to me or my family. I've been fortunate to be a full-time novelist for a long time. So in a way, I've been on lockdown for 20 years because I work at home. And, so I can't say I've had, a difficult time at all. I mean, I even had the added bonus. I have one child who's an adult and lives on her own, but she lost her job because of the shutdown, came home and lived with us for 6 months. So I'd already gotten over all the empty nesting and all that kind of stuff. And then here I get to live with my daughter for a bonus 6 months. So again, I've had it easy. And so I can't really say it's affected me too much. Part of that question was the research. Yeah, I'm not going out and having breakfast with detectives like I would do on a regular basis, but I have enough connections that I'm actually having Zooms. I do Zoom research now, get people on Zoom. And so I don't think I've been hampered in my efforts to do research. It's just adapting to the times.
Great, thank you. We've got 2 more before we conclude. Thank you all so much for sending so many brilliant questions through. I hope that I've done my best to answer the ones that came through first and most often. Mandy has said, Michael, your 2 books this year have been highlights in a rough time. What have you been reading to escape the world?
That's interesting. Ben and I were talking about that. It's weird. It's almost like looking at a traffic accident. The stuff going on in my country is so bizarre and discomforting, but it's hard to look away. So I can't say like I've been reading a whole lot, but I've, a couple of books that I've read recently that, oh, by the way, I just ordered Ben's book, Snake Island. I'll be reading that next week. I read this book recently called Blacktop Wasteland by a writer named S.A. Cosby. And it's a great book that, some of the questions that we just had about, are you going to try to capture what is going on in the social unrest in your country? And this book does it. It was actually written before any of this happened, but it captures it. And it's about a African American man who is on the straight and narrow, but he has a past in crime, and it's about the pressures that push him back into committing a crime. And he's an expert getaway driver. So it's a book that has a real social reflection and important social reflection, and it has this really strong momentum, the momentum of a car speeding away from a robbery type thing. It's a real slingshot of a book is what I always have that term in my head, that I hope my books are slingshots. You kind of pull back a little bit as you get into the story, and then you let it go, and the story races off. And Blacktop Wasteland is my big pick of the moment.
Awesome, thank you. And so the last comment and question that we have is from Joshua, who says, thank you so much, Michael, for your epic, iconic work, which has totally influenced my first novel that Joshua's writing right now in quarantine. And Joshua has asked, who were your influences when you first started to write, and how difficult did you find writing your first novel?
Well, I mean, I had a lot of influences. I had like what I called the dead influences, writers that wrote classic books that weren't around anymore, like Raymond Chandler and Ross MacDonald. But a couple of current writers that I was studying their work when I was writing my first book were James Lee Burke and Lawrence Block. And it was good to have like contemporary books to look at. You're really groping around in the dark when you're writing your first book, because you don't really know much about the industry of publishing and so forth. And it's often hard to keep your head down and just focus on your character and on the story. And so, like, I look back at my first book and feel like I overwrote it. I didn't even know whether, what it would be like to have an editor. I didn't know whether you'd be able to trust your editor and all that stuff, all the stuff I learned that you can. And so I look back and think that I probably rewrote my first book 5 or 6 times. And it was really, I think, a psychological thing. I was putting off sending it out into the world and possibly getting rejected. And so if I could go back and do that, I would have broken it off after maybe the 3rd rewrite and sent it out into the world. And who knows, maybe I'd have 3 more books by now if I hadn't overwritten that first book.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for a fantastic discussion. Ben, your questions were brilliant as always. It's been an absolute pleasure to host. We are now out of time, so unless either of you have any final questions or comments that you would like to make, I will be inviting the audience to take themselves off mute so that they can join me in thanking you both for this discussion. Did you have anything that you wanted to say before I open up the room?
I just always enjoyed talking to Ben. Thank you for doing this again, Ben, and good luck with Snake Island. I'm looking forward to reading it. And to everybody for, it means so much that, I write about this guy trying to make sense of his world in Los Angeles, and then here's all these people across 2 or 3 oceans that are interested in that. And that's, the power of storytelling. And so these moments are very fulfilling to me, and I just want to say thanks. Thanks for being there.
Yeah, and I just want to say really quickly, thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to talk to you as well. And absolutely grab this if you haven't already. I know the link's in the chat. You are guaranteed always with the Michael Connelly to get exactly what you need during this pandemic. So it's absolutely worthwhile. Thank you for writing it too, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to invite you all now to take yourselves off mute if you would like, so that you can join me in thank you, Michael. Lovely to have you all with us today. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
The rest of the day, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.